We ready?
We're recording. Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This will be an interesting conversation, just because, as we were just saying, for those of you who've just beamed in, I feel a little bit disoriented this morning after several years. So it will be good to have this discussion. Particularly this discussion, I think, is key for my sort of being in this moment. This will make it official. Today we are going to talk about inaugurations and what they mean and why they're important above and beyond the obvious, which is the change of power. But before we plunge into that, I want to turn things over to my partner in crime, Matt, who will explain the rules of the game for this morning.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third episode of our second season, is what we're calling this, or our 2021 season. And this is, as always, this should be a fun time. Rules of the game are as follows. If this is your first time, we encourage you to use chat so that you can engage in conversation with your fellow participants and with us. I just ask that you please keep it family friendly and germane to the conversation. And if you do have questions that you want to ask Joanne, please make sure to put those in the Q&A. It's a lot easier to track questions in the Q&A and make sure that we address everything. A lot of times if you put it in chat, it'll kind of scroll by and we won't get a chance to see it, or we'll forget about it. So put those in Q&A and we will try to get to as many as we can at the end of Joanne's talk here today. And as always, if you like what we're doing here at the National Council for History Education, please join us. You can go to the web. It's www.ncheteach.org and look around. Join our conference, which is coming up in a couple. Let's see, not too long. 3 months now. 2.5 months. About 2.5 months now. So come to the conference, the virtual conference. So we have a lot of really cool activities. And a lot of great speakers, a lot of great keynotes. I'm really personally looking forward to seeing Annette Gordon-Reed, who I know, Joanne, you've worked with in the past, to see her talk. But we're really looking forward to our conference. One other note, and this is sort of now public now, but if you want to save the date for March 10th, March 10th at 7:00 p.m., we are going to host an online event with Sarah Vowell, the noted historian, essayist, actor, NPR, wunderkind, all good things. So if you want to save that date, that should be a lot of fun. Space will be limited to that one to, I believe, just 1,000 people. So you want to make sure to make sure you have space there. And with that, I'm turning back to Joanne, and look forward to a great conversation today, and hopefully a uplifting and wonderful conversation. So Joanne, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to mention one logistical thing before we launch, and I haven't yet talked about it with Matt, and so you and I, Matt, will talk about it after, but I raise it now, and we can talk about it as a group next week. And that is simply that the week after next, my semester starts, and this semester I'm teaching on Thursdays.
Ooh.
And so I'm going to experiment to see if I can keep our Thursday morning time, and if not, whether there needs to be a Friday morning instead. But I haven't even talked to Matt or thought about it at all. I just sort of realized in the last week or so, it's like, oh yeah, I lecture Thursday afternoons, which means Thursday morning I will probably be writing lectures. So at any rate, we could figure that out, and we can talk about that more next week.
We are game for whatever. We're just grateful for your participation and your help, and this has been truly a great year listening to your conversation. So whatever to make it work, we will do that. So
thank you, Matt. This has been pretty invaluable to me too. So I do not want to go away. So we will figure this out, and we'll see what happens. I've never lectured on Zoom before, so I have no idea what that's like or what it's like to prepare for that. But in the meantime, today we're talking about inaugurations. Now, when I was, I'm going to move this out of the way here. When I was pondering what to talk about today, it wasn't hard to decide that I was going to be, move this here too. Okay, talking about inaugurations. I knew what I wanted to use as a primary source because it's one of my favorite primary sources. I had this vague sense that at some point in the past, because I love this source so much, I might have used it. And this morning, I brilliantly thought, maybe you should check to see if you've used this primary source before. And lo and behold, I have, for a totally different reason though. So I feel totally in the clear about this. But the primary source that's posted today, I've offered it to you, actually the original pages of it, and I'm going to talk more about what it is in a moment. Back on April 30th, when I last used this source, I gave you a very handy transcribed version of it. So if you can't read the handwriting for today's document, which I do not blame some of you for not being able to read it, there is a transcribed version posted on the April 30th conversation, which was about diaries. But at any rate, before we plunge into that, I want to talk about inaugurations and what they mean. And in a sense, that's the most obvious of topics, right? Because we know what they mean. They represent a transition in power. They represent a kind of ceremony that means something, and that we, the people, need to see. I'm going to come back to that idea. We know what inaugurations are. But what I wanted to talk about was kind of on a deeper level, what inaugurations mean. And you can tell I'm in New York City if you can hear that siren. What I wanted to talk about was, and using this diary entry that I mentioned, the first inauguration and how it was discussed and debated before it happened, meaning people in the first Congress trying to figure out what should happen in an inauguration, and in having that conversation, really revealing what they thought was significant about it, what it demonstrated, what it showed, and what that can help us think about today as we're thinking about this most recent inauguration. So it's from William McClay's diary. He was a senator in the first Congress from Pennsylvania. Amazing diary. It is online. An old version of it is online. There's a newer, more accurate version that was published, I think by Johns Hopkins Press. But it's a wonderful diary. It is a diary. I use sometimes bits of it when I teach courses about how to do cultural history, because it's a diary. So there are weird references, there are incomplete sentences, there are things that are from that moment that are hard to figure out or transcribe. There are all kinds of ways in which it's not an easy source, but that's part of why it's useful as a source. And I'm sure this is what I talked about back in April when I talked about diaries, is diaries are really remarkably useful depending on the kind of history that you're doing, because although there's an assumption on by some that people might see them, often they're really meant to be private. And if they're really private, then people are going to write in them in a way that they might not write in letters, or engage with people in another way. So at any rate, McClay's diary is great. And he writes everything down in there. He writes down the gossip he hears around the room. So one occasion he says he hears someone in the Senate whisper, "John Adams needs his wig dressed," which you're just not going to find that anywhere else but in a diary. He records the snack foods that people are snacking on. Apparently orange pieces were very popular in 1790. He writes all kinds of fascinating things down, his dreams, his thoughts, his opinions on what he's seeing. It's a great resource. The toys he buys his kids. So for all kinds of reasons, it captures that kind of moment. But the entry that, in a sense, I love the best is the one that I want to talk about today. And it represents the date of this initial inauguration for George Washington, and the discussion in the Senate about what should happen during the ceremony itself. And I'm going to read a little bit from it. As I said, I've posted online for this week, pages of the original diary with McClay's handwriting. April 30th, there's a printed version of it if you want to follow along with part of that there. And McClay has this very dry sense of humor, which you will hear right off the cuff here. He writes in his diary, 30th April, Thursday. This is a great important day. Goddess of etiquette, assist me while I describe it. So he's already kind of tongue in cheek. So he describes how he gets up and he puts on what he calls my best clothes, important day. And he goes to the Senate, and the vice president, John Adams, rises in what Maclay calls the most solemn manner. And now these are Maclay's words. This son of Adam seemed impressed with deeper gravity, yet what shall I think of him? He often in the midst of his most important airs, I believe when he is at a loss for expression, and this he often is, wrapped up, I suppose, in the contemplation of his own importance. Maclay has issues with John Adams, suffers an unmeaning kind of vacant laugh to escape him. And this was the case today, and really to me bore the air of ridiculing the farce he was acting. Quote, gentlemen, I wish for the direction of the Senate, Adams says. The president will, I suppose, address the Congress. How shall I behave? How shall we receive it? Shall it be standing or sitting? So Adams opens this conversation saying, uh-oh, the president's coming in now, the new president, and I'm president of the Senate in a sense. What does that mean? What's happening? Senate, we must discuss what needs to happen here. Maclay then goes on and says, here followed a considerable deal of talk from him, which I could make nothing of. Then he says, Mr. Lee began with the House of Commons, as is usual with him, then the House of Lords, then the King, then back again. The result of this information was that the Lords sat and the Commons stood on the delivery of the King's speech. So they're immediately going to Parliament, right? What do they do there? As you'll hear, they're not entirely sure whether the United States should do what they do in Parliament or should not do what they do in Parliament since we've broken away, but that they go first to that example. What do they do there? So Lee talks about what he's seen there, Commons, House, King. Mr. Izzard got up and told how often he'd been in the House of Parliament. He said a great deal of what he had seen there. He made, however, this sagacious discovery that the Commons stood because they had no seats to sit on, being arrived at the bar of the House of Lords. So basically, the first guy says, well, you know, when the King's speech is happening, the Commons, which would be the equivalent of the House, is standing, and the House of Lords is sitting, and maybe that means something. And these people in the Senate are like, that maybe we should be seated, and people from the House of Representatives should be standing, as they do in England. And Izzard says, no, the House of Commons is standing because they don't have chairs, because they're in the House of Lords. There's no deep meaning there. So, okay, that's the end of that. Mr. Adams got up again and said he had very often indeed been very often indeed at the Parliament on those occasions, but there always was such a crowd and ladies along that for his part, he could not say how it was. So thank you, John Adams. He stands up and says, I actually can't, I was there a lot, but I really couldn't see. There were too many ladies along. Thank you, John Adams. Mr. Carroll got up to declare that he thought it of no consequence how it was in Great Britain. They were no rule to us, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that thought, right? How interesting that we're talking about Parliament in England. Why is that our example? It should not be our example. At this point, and I won't read this passage, someone comes in, a clerk comes in from the House of Representatives with a message, and this launches an enormous debate over what was the proper etiquette for when a message comes from the House to the Senate and it's delivered by a messenger. Should the messenger be allowed in? Should the message be taken from the messenger and brought in? What are the implications? What's the propriety? So you can see it's not just the inauguration, but literally every single thing they do sets a precedent. And I'm going to come back to this with the inauguration, but generally speaking, they're debating everything at this kind of length because of their realization that precedents are being set, that some of these are political precedents and some of these are precedents of political culture, and that those can really shape the new republic, that those have an impact on power and where it goes and what it means, and the engagement of the American public with it. So part of all of this, which I love this entry only because on a certain level, newbie is not fond of it. I can suddenly say, sorry, noobs. That on a certain level, there's a ridiculousness to it because they're so focused on detail. On the other hand, what's kind of moving about it is their assumption that all of these details really matter because whatever happens is enacting some aspect of what the government means, and that matters. Newbie is now being angry and oodling alternately. I just wanted to narrate that for you. I don't know why. At any rate, so the messenger comes in. They have this discussion about what do they do? Do they let him in? Do they not? Someone says, well, you know, a communication and a delivery are not the same thing. Is this a communication or a message delivery? This is another one of these kinds of conversations. Then we move on. The president comes in. He advances between the Senate and representatives. He bows to each. He's placed in a chair by the vice president. The Senate with their president on the right, the speaker and the representatives on his left. The vice president rises and addresses a short sentence to Washington. The import of it was that Washington should now take the oath of office as president. Adams seemed to have forgot half of what he was to say, for he made a dead pause and stood for some time to appearance in a vacant mood. He finished with a formal bow, and the president was conducted out of the middle window into the gallery, and the oath was administered by the chancellor. So the oath of office is administered outside, although everything else we're going to hear about is in the Senate chamber. For him to take the oath, he goes out on a sort of veranda of the building that they're in, and the oath is sworn in front of the public. And Maclay says, notice that the business done was communicated to the crowd by proclamation, etc., who gave 3 cheers and repeated it on the president's bowing to them. So Maclay is actually saying, notice, this was public. This was done before the public. And I think Maclay thinks that this is exactly what should have happened. So then everyone comes in off the veranda into the Senate chamber. The president takes his chair. Senators and representatives take their seats. So clearly the representatives have been allowed to sit. So then Washington stands up and he addresses everyone assembled there. And this is also kind of touching because it's a reminder that these moments that we take as ceremony, potentially meaningless ceremony, although they're meaningful, but also no matter how ceremonial and formal and pre-calculated they mean something to the people engaging in them. So now Washington stands up basically to give an address. And Maclay writes, this great man was agitated and embarrassed more than ever he was by the leveled cannon or pointed musket. He trembled and several times could scarce make out to read, though it must be supposed he had often read it before. He put part of the fingers of his left hand into the side of what I think the tailors call the fall of the breeches, changing the paper into his other hand. After some time, he then did the same with some of the fingers of his right hand. When he came to the words, all the world, he made a flourish with his right hand, which left rather an ungainly impression. I sincerely, for my part, wished all set ceremony in the hands of the dancing masters, and that this first of men had read off his address in the plainest manner, without ever taking his eyes from the paper, for I felt hurt that he was not first in everything. And I find that kind of touching. But what's interesting about it to me, first of all, is the significance of everything, the precedent-setting nature of it. But what they're really debating there when they're talking about standing or sitting with the House and Senate and the fact that it needs to happen in front of the public, they're not just talking about the transition of power. They are talking about the nature of power, the balance of power, who has the power, right? So the public is included in that process because the power is from we, the people. All of the things that they're debating there are a reminder that what we watched yesterday and what any inauguration is partly the enacting of the transition of power, the sort of fundamental aspect of democratic government, right? That there's an election happens, there is a conclusion of the election picks a person as the winner, that winner is given power, and we watch that, and it matters that we see that, and it matters enough so that Other presidents are there to also symbolize and represent the fact that this has happened before and will happen again. It represents continuity of power, continuity of the democratic process. But the part that I think probably I hadn't focused on until this particular year was the degree to which, more than anything else, it's not just the transition of power, it's about power. It's about where the power goes, who has the power, what does it mean that they have that power? The publicness of it and the spectacle of it is important because it really is about us. It's a ceremony about the government, but it's a ceremony of democratic process, which means it really is a ceremony celebrating what we as a nation have done. So I wanted to make that point today, partly because I think it's easy to forget the meaning behind some ceremonies or ceremonial things. I thought about this a lot after January 6th as well, because there were a number of reasons why that had a big impact. One of them was because of the ceremonial space that it was in. So on a number of levels, what happened that day was horrific and wrong and an attack on the US government. It was also an attack on the structure that embodies a branch of the government that is, in a sense, the democratic branch of the government, our house. That mattered, and it's deliberately symbolic. And there's a reason why there are all of these statues of justice and truth and all of these Trumbull images in the rotunda representing, great moments in American history. All of that is there because you're supposed to see that space as representative, as symbolic. And things that happen in that way and in that kind of a space have a meaning, a deeper meaning. So in watching the inauguration, I thought back to the Capitol, and I understood. I did a program yesterday late afternoon. I was part of a panel talking about the last administration and the next administration, and it was me and two other historians, and we were asked at the end, what did we feel watching the inauguration? And more than one of us said we cried because it represented the change in power. It represented the system. It represented in some way a degree of normality and change of a sort that, we the people did with our votes. So in a way, and I'm very intrigued to see what the next, few months are going to feel like. I think many things that we took for granted in the past, even if they're just ceremonial, are going to have a much deeper meaning, because what they really mean, what they really suggest, things that I think as a nation we took for granted about our government, is going to be more apparent now and more meaningful now. So I expect myself to be crying a lot, because I really do think in a lot of different ways, all kinds of things that we took for granted, including, as I've said here any number of times, democracy itself. Many of the things that were there either to symbolize it or uphold it or represent it or reinforce it in one way or another, we took those for granted too. And so watching yesterday's events was a reminder of that too. It's also a reminder because there were innovations. It was a very inclusive inauguration. The young woman, the poet, was incredible, 22 years old. There were all kinds of things about it that represented this moment and were a deliberate cultural statement about this moment that mattered as well. So I guess that was my impulse behind what we're talking about today. And I very much want you folks to be able to talk about it as well, because that was an important moment, even though without it, power would have transferred. Seeing that happen and being reminded that there is a process and that the process normally works and that democracy is still here is a fine and wonderful thing to see. I also think, and I will be talking about this some not today, in which I'm still feeling celebratory, but we need to learn from what happened. We should not take things for granted now. We were on a precipice of a dangerous sort. We are not necessarily home free. I don't know what's going to happen next. I know that an important thing has happened in this transition of power, the new president and an inauguration, and a chunk of the nation coming together to say, yes, the process functioned, but there are still threats out there. I don't mean to be a sort of Debbie Downer, but there are. And it would be irresponsible of us to pretend that it's all over, because it isn't. And I don't think wherever we head next, I don't think it's going to go back to the old normal. I don't necessarily think it should go back to the old normal. I don't know necessarily where we will go. But I think that's probably some of what we're going to be talking about here on History Matters and So Does Coffee in coming weeks and months, is where are we going, and what are we seeing, and what does it suggest? What do the actions and policy decisions suggest? What do the ways in which they're being enacted suggest? What do we think about the health of democracy? What do we think about, I suppose, the democracy being less than healthy and what that suggests? We're really, from the very beginning, the first week we did this, I talked about contingency and really not knowing what's coming next. And I've talked about it, you're all probably like in your sleep now can say contingency. But it's significant, and really now particularly because things feel familiar, and you know, I slept a full night's sleep last night and the night before for the first time in 4 years. I did not wake up at 3 in the morning. When I woke up, I literally thought it was 3 in the morning, and I looked at my phone and I was like, oh, it's 7. So things are going to feel normal, but I think we have to be responsible in thinking about where things can go next for positive and negative. We can be better. We can do things better. We can be more inclusive. We can be more, we can defend democracy in better ways. We can be more aware of threats that we weren't aware of before. All of these things, we need to be thinking about these things as a nation and discussing them as a nation. And so without being a Debbie Downer, I do want to conclude my opening comments here by just saying, I anticipate conversations among us in weeks to come about where it looks like we're going and about what that means, because this is a moment of extreme contingency. No matter how normal it might feel, it isn't. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think I said also that first week that moments of extreme contingency hold the potential for instability, and they also hold the potential for dramatic positive change. And that matters. So this is a moment of contingency, and we can do things with it in a positive way. And we have to remember that and not fall back into old habits without thinking, because we need to be thoughtful, because I think if nothing else, the last 4 years taught us that we really need to be thoughtful and aware of what's happening around us, and we should not take anything for granted, including democracy. Okay, it's kind of a pompous tone to end on, but that's basically the message I wanted to get across, and just get us beyond what a wonderful ceremony it was, and really think about the meaning of what we witnessed yesterday, which had so many meanings. But now I want to open things up so that we can talk about either the inauguration or, generally speaking, sort of where people feel we are right now. It's been quite wonderful to be here with this community at a variety of meaningful moments over the course of the last however many months. So let's open things. Oh, and as always,
I was going to remind you.
So anyone here who is new, every week I have brought a mug that represents in some way the conversation, the topic we're talking about. And every week Matt has a background that also represents what we're talking about. And every week I forget every week since April to reveal the mug. So this week's mug, it was a gift. and Matt, you'll have to tell me who it's from. But you'll see it's for very good reason that I chose it.
Yes.
Pomp and Crest. We will have to explain what this means. Pomp and Crest for the door, 89. Among other things, yes, Pomp and Crest, exclamation points. It was taken from a past episode we did about women in politics, in which there was a satirical account of Roxana. You're going to have to get me the name right.
Roxana Wilhelmina Poppencrest.
Wilhelmina Poppencrest, who wanted to be the doorkeeper for the house, and they were making fun of the idea that a woman, heaven forbid, could be the doorkeeper of the house. Who made this?
I don't remember.
Whoever did,
I'm a terrible host. I should remember these things.
I should too, and I don't remember.
If you're here and you made it, please tell us, because I want to write it down this time.
It represents this new start, new things, change, right? So that is why I picked this mug. It was appropriate.
Well done.
It's also a fine and wonderful mug. It was one of the first things that happened that I thought, hey, we're like really a community. Look at this. Someone made a mug.
I know. It was, oh my gosh. And it's one of my favorite mugs too.
Anyway, so that is the choice. But now, Matt, we need to talk about your background before we launch into our conversation.
Yeah, so the background, the real background, if you caught it before we started recording, there was a joke background, which maybe I'll put up during the after party again. But so this is the real background. I don't think anybody got it this week. Give everybody just a quick second. So this is a nod to our new president. This is it's called Home Place, and it's an education center in Ireland devoted to the work of Seamus Heaney.
Oh, I not in a million years would not.
It was a hard one this week, I freely admit, but that was the poem that of course the president is very fond of. I thought it'd be a nice nod to him. So
very nice. I approve. As I said, master of background. Okay, let's open things up for folks who have comments.
Yes. So we have 10 questions so far, and as always, my threat remains, which is, I will move to the side here in just 1 second. My threat always remains the same, which is if you don't ask questions, I'm going to come up with questions, and nobody likes my questions. So we're gonna so make sure you
probably not true, but you do say so.
Excuse me. So get your questions in the Q&A, and I will move as I ask this first question. This is Francesca. Let me move so you can see this. So Francesca asks, I'd never seen the gift giving ceremony before, which I loved. Is this a long-standing thing? Can you talk a little bit about this?
You know, I actually don't know that. The implication of it yesterday was that, yes, it is a long-standing thing, but I don't remember seeing it before either. That doesn't mean anything, because I think I was more alert to what was going on yesterday than I probably have been for a while. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. I was struck by it, but I'm kind of assuming it wasn't something new. Folks out there might know even better than I know, but it felt to me like something that happened before, but I don't know if it happened during the last inauguration, but it is not new. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that.
It happens at the lunch. Right. So that was the thing, is that some of the things we saw, probably we don't normally see because they actually do indoor events. Lunches, dinners, dances. So that would make perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just looking in here and trying to get some history about it. So somebody can get a link, that would be amazing. No, I thought that was really great. And I just got to say on that note, I thought Mitch McConnell's speech was actually very, very nice for the gifts from the Senate. I thought that was, I enjoyed that he poked a little fun at the fact that both the president and vice president skipped over the House, and both came right from the Senate. So I thought it was nice to see a little bit of levity during that.
A little bit of levity was a fine thing. I would agree.
Let's see. I don't know how well you can answer this, but I'm sure you can talk about this from the perspective of the early America. But Tim wants to know, besides unity, what have been some other common themes in the history of inaugural addresses?
Well, some of them, depending on when they are, unity, it might not have used that word, but the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is Jefferson, who, his inaugural comes after the intensity of the late 1790s and the nation being polarized and people being afraid that the election of 1800 wasn't going to be decided and people threatening military action. And, he basically says famously, right, we are all Federalists, we are all Republicans, trying to suggest like basically we fundamentally all agree on something. So in a way, that's unity. What I think is interesting about the unity message, and I wrote about this a little bit. It's possible I'll have an op-ed coming out in the next couple of days. I actually finally wrote one of the things I said I was going to write. Week after week, I'm like, I'm going to write about that. And I finally did and sent it off. But one of the things I wrote about was unity, because the word can have different meanings. And I think it's important to recognize that democracies don't need unity in a very specific way to survive. That democracy is about conflicting ideas and encompassing dissension and protest. And that's what it's grounded on, is the fact that we don't all have to agree. So while we do need to be united in caring about the nation and its survival, there are things we need to be united about. I feel like particularly now when we're going to have a lot of angry people about what just happened, acknowledging the fact that unity doesn't mean fundamental agreement about everything, and that not agreeing is, we just were in an administration where not agreeing was bad. It meant you were un-American, and that's actually not who we are. So that's the other side of the unity message. I do think, you could point to similar things with Lincoln too, that when during moments of real trial and tribulation, they don't always use the word. And as I said, I'm a little unsure about that word right now, but the message, I don't remember if I spoken here about this or somewhere else, but if you look over the long haul of American history, at moments of extreme polarization and crisis, like the late 1790s, like the 1960s, like the present, one of the things that pulls us out of those moments is the political process itself, right? Is an election or a Supreme Court decision or something that refers to process and not people, and that we as a country supposedly agree on. Like the Constitution can be interpreted in all kinds of ways, but we do basically agree. It's our grounding document. So that's some of what is interesting about the present day. And it was something that I was watching, and to be honest, something that I was nervous about, because aspects of the process were being eroded in different ways. And I knew that its process, that was the only hope of pulling us out of wherever we were. So I think that's probably another aspect that goes into messages is, people talk about democracy, and some of what they're talking about in inaugural addresses is the working of democracy, is the actual process that was fundamental, the sort of founding generation in creating that Constitution. One of the fundamental, most important things they felt that they were doing was creating what they considered to be a fair process to put in motion, so that when there were crises, there would be a place to go to get us out of them. Mm-hmm. So, process is important, even if we don't often think about that. This gets back to the inauguration idea, but praising the democratic process sounds like a lot of rhetoric, but it has a meaning, a deeper meaning too.
Well, that kind of gets us into Dave's question. And Dave asks, was President Biden's inaugural address yesterday the best since, quote unquote, JFK's ever, or where does it rank? And this kind of, and so I'm just expand on this for a second. So, one of the things we heard a lot of references to Lincoln's inaugural and JFK. I mentioned to Christy Bruger in our thing yesterday that even though it wasn't an inaugural speech, I heard a lot of sort of Reagan's Morning in America themes sort of emerging from that. And so I wondered if you might talk a little bit about this idea of sort of ranking the conceptual elements of inaugural addresses. And for me, I'll say that I heard, as I was listening to it or re-listening to it for the second time, the first time I sort of just caught up in it, but when I went back and listened to it again, I was really interested in how I heard a lot of themes that were very similar to FDR's first inaugural, sort of, and how the moments might be similar. So I guess, can we just expand on this idea of like the ranking of these inaugural addresses, and how do we think about sort of the rhetoric that is produced during these in terms of the historical moment that they're given in? That's a lot of words for kind of a simple thing. Let's talk more about his delivery.
Well, the end of what you just asked, Matt, is the part that I would zero in on. So yeah. I actually wouldn't feel comfortable just sort of stepping back and saying the best inaugural address that happened ever was. Excellent. Because I think precisely what you said. What matters is the moment, the address and the moment, and how they do or don't suit each other. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what Biden did was very, not just appropriate, but good for this moment. He did a lot. And I think hearkening back to other themes and other addresses was good. I think emphasizing humanity and compassion was really good. I think having a moment of silence for people who have died from COVID was good. I think a lot of the things he did, with or without the word unity, were really good for this moment, were really kind of what was needed in this moment. I don't think I had any expectations one way or another, but as it was unfolding, kind of what Matt suggested, I was caught up in it the first time, but as it was unfolding, part of me was sort of like, that needs to happen now. Oh, that needs to happen now. So it was good for the moment. And I think it was pointed, but not harsh. It included the assumption that there will have to be actions taken of some kind and going ahead, but there was nothing vindictive in it either. I've been all over Twitter with saying accountability. I've now moved beyond contingency. Now I'm into accountability. But accountability without, a sense of revenge or punishment is pretty important. And I thought that he communicated well that he was standing in a place with ideas about what needed to happen next, understood what had just happened and what was problematic in it, but was coming across as being fair-minded about it. And I thought that was all of that. I thought was good and really a fine thing for this particular moment, which, it's interesting. It just occurred to me. So people who were there, like McClay, as a matter of fact, he is one of the people who says what I'm about to say. People looked at Washington as the first president setting precedents with everything he did. And a lot of them said, I wouldn't want to be him, because he's in a tough spot, because every single thing he does will set a precedent. He will have to think about everything he does. Does he sit? Does he stand? What do his dishes look like? What is he wearing? So a lot of people were saying that's quite a moment. And I think we're in that kind of a moment again. There's so many ways in which this is a challenging moment, above and beyond whatever blank slates have been left behind blank that shouldn't be, but just, this is I hate as a historian to say unprecedented, distinctive.
Unique.
Distinctive. Yeah, well, and unique is tricky. Like, if you're going to say unique, you better mean unique. But I actually do think this is a unique moment, precisely not just because of the last administration, but even just because of January 6th. This is a tricky time for a new administration to come in, for a new president to come in, it'll be interesting to sort of watch how that proceeds. He has, he and his administration, President Biden and his administration, have quite a challenge on many levels in front of them.
So this gets into what Richard's question. We might as well get into it now since we're talking about it. And Richard, with apologies, I'm just going to twist this just a little bit for you. His question is, how hard will it be for the new administration to balance accountability, such as impeachment, other investigations, with unity, pulling together to address the pandemic and the economy? And what evidence do we have from history that will help us answer that question? And sort of the second part of that I want to ask.
But ask that again.
So the question is, how hard will it be for the new administration to balance accountability with unity? And my part of it is, what evidence do we have from history that would support that balance?
I mean, I do think, and that's what I've been sort of blathering about.
Wrestling with, yeah.
Well, I've said over and over again, no unity without accountability.
Yeah.
And I just mean that you can't have unity unless people are accountable for fundamentally violating the pact that joins us together. As far as history goes, gosh, if there's I'm trying to think of a historic example that sort of shows that working or not working. And off the top of my head sitting here, that's not happening, which doesn't mean it's not there. It's just not popping into my head. I do think, it is one of the things I'm feeling most strongly right now, which is why I've written about it and why I've tweeted about it and why I'm going to continue talking about it, is because, and if and when, knocking on wood, this op-ed comes out, one of the things I talk about is that democracy is grounded on dissension and disagreement, and that's part of what it encompasses. But for that very reason, there need to be lines that you cannot cross beyond. Dissension is fine, but you cannot take that to its ultimate end. And without drawing those lines, you're opening things up to a sort of winner takes all, might makes right kind of a government. So I think for a whole bunch of reasons, accountability is pretty important, particularly in this case, because of the nature of the crime and the larger implications of it and the last 4 years. It matters. And just going back to what I said about process, right? We had an election. The election was tested and challenged and over again. The result of the election was pretty clear. So, and people were unwilling to acknowledge that. That's the most fundamental process of all in a democracy, is that we get to vote and choose who we want to be in office. To question that and challenge that, and some people are still doing that, that's not just irresponsible, that's dangerous. That's the beginning process of all that represents a functioning democracy. So for all of these reasons, I just think it's like the most important thing that has to happen next. And I have no prediction as to whether it will, but I'm going to probably say it should a lot in coming weeks.
We have about 10 minutes left, so let's turn our attention to, we mentioned it earlier, or you mentioned it earlier, which is Amanda Gorman's poem. Both, let's see, Christy and Dave are both asking about it, so we're going to do a twofer here. Dave asks about incorporating it into your curriculum, and I'm going to preface this with a little bit of information, which Joanne, and so I do want to mention that to all our teachers out there, please be careful about taking Amanda Gorman's incredible words and like paying somebody for her intellectual property. A lot of curriculum companies might try to utilize her words, especially the popular site Teachers, what is it? The lesson planning site about teachers paying teachers or something like that. People are sort of appropriating her words. Just be really careful and give her the credit and the rights to her own intellectual property. So I do want to preface that with this. And then I also want to mention that about the poetry at inaugurations. There's only been 4 presidents that have used poetry or a poet at their inauguration. With all that sort of as a preface, then, so can we talk about the importance of poetry as a reflection of our of American history, which is Christy's question, and then how do we use that in classrooms, which is Dave's question. So let's wax philosophical about poetry here for a little bit, if we can.
Okay, I mean, I'll do some of that, and then Matt, you can talk some about teaching too. But as far as my waxing philosophical, I think that having poetry does a couple of things. I think it touches you on a level that an inaugural address does not. It touches you on a kind of, ideally, if it's good poetry, on a kind of emotional level and a kind of a spiritual level, and being in a large group of people, watching it as a nation, and having that same sort of moment of feeling compelled by it. Talking about unity, that's a unifying thing. It's a sort of call to recognize a we, right? The other thing about it, and I already have seen people on Twitter saying this, is, did you love the poem? Did it really move you? Fund the humanities. Because really,
True.
I think,
Yep.
I think people, just like people have a lot of stupid assumptions about the study of history being boring and it's a bunch of dates, and poetry, I think for a lot of people it's just like boring, highbrow. It's like, no, actually, it isn't. And that was a great example. This young woman who like lit up the stage and had such passion about what she was doing and communicated such important things at such an important moment. That's a great example of things that the humanities can do. The sciences do different things wonderfully, but typically that's not what the sciences do. So I get frustrated. I'm sure a lot of you do too, about all these people who are like, humanities are impractical. Like, why are we studying the humanities? Like, what job can you get with the humanities? It's like the word humanities, they're about the human condition. And we really need to understand that in our gut if we're going to do anything else right. And so I, among other things, I think that moment and yesterday and the power of it and the nature of how it was enacted and who did it and its inclusion said a lot. And I think people today responding and saying, wow, what a poem, are partly responding to the poem and partly responding to the fact that that poem with that person delivered in that way was there at that time.
The performance of it.
Yeah. In addition to the fact that it was wonderful. But I don't know, Matt, do you want to say something about teaching with it?
Yeah, no, I first of all, I 100% agree. I mean, that's just, it's phenomenal. And actually, what I was listening to it, other than just being awed by this person's incredible talent, I kept thinking, this resonates with Maya Angelou's poem when Bill Clinton was inaugurated, and which when I was a humanities teacher back in my days in K-12 education. We used to teach that, right? And so that's one way to engage this. Look at the earlier poems. What Frost, sort of the tenor of Frost's poem, is very different than the tenor of Maya Angelou's and Amanda Gordon's. Right? The sort of thematic structures of those is very, very different, and it's a really interesting way. And so if you're in a humanities or literature class, that's a real easy, connection. If you're in a social studies class, it's really helpful to look at how those concepts of what Amanda was talking about, or Ms. Gorman was talking about yesterday about, acknowledging our past and thinking about the sort of social context in which we live and being aware of those, but at the same time uniting together and moving forward, and how that reflects the sensibilities of the political moment. That's a really important function of these kinds of things. So sorry, go ahead.
Something that you just said, because you just used the word sensibilities, and that relates to something that I think would be particularly effective teaching with poetry. And I use it teaching 18th century documents, which can be, they seem so formal and it's hard to communicate and connect with them. And very often what I'll start off that kind of discussion with is I will ask my students, my undergrads particularly, what does this document make you feel? What do you feel when you read this document? Like, and I'll free it open, right? I'll be like, there's a particular letter that a Hamilton letter that I teach and love. And one of the opening questions I always have about it is, what does this make you feel? Does it seem gossipy? Does it seem angry? Does it seem like pissy? Does it seem petty? Does it seem, and in a way, there's not a wrong answer for emotions. What do you feel is not a question with a wrong answer. And particularly with poetry, in addition to, I think you can move on to themes, open that up by perhaps making it user-friendly by saying, what do these poems make you feel? Which can be a good entry question into getting to things that might feel a little more daunting. So I find that a really useful thing in talking about primary documents with people who aren't used to working with primary documents, because there's no right answer. And that's the best kind of question to open a discussion with. So that's my 2 cents.
No, I think and it's important, you know, we that emotion part is so important. And it's important to also to acknowledge that yesterday wasn't the only poem that was performed, right? The other one that was performed is the Defense of Fort McHenry, better known as the Star Spangled Banner, which began as a poem, right? And you know, and so thinking about that in those historical terms and how that poem sort of became, not sort of, but became our national anthem, you know, that we can acknowledge that there are these moments where poetry becomes part of our national consciousness. So, okay. Let's see. We have, oh gosh, only 2 minutes. And folks, I was going to save a whole like 20 minutes for us to discuss the drapes. Was a major conversation as you were getting going.
People getting very upset about the drapes in the Oval Office.
There is actually a question in the Q&A about drapes. Somebody asked, which is all wonderful. But I guess let's end with this last question. And 2 folks are asking about this, so I'm going to kind of combine them into one question, which is, can you just summarize this idea of the president being inaugurated or taking the oath in public? And we've obviously had times Lincoln and some folks like Obama, one of January 20th was on like a Sunday, so they didn't do the inauguration till Monday. You know, LBJ, of course, you know, there's lots of instances where American presidents have taken the oath, you know, in private. But you made a special point in your conversation earlier about Washington stepping out onto the veranda, right? Mm-hmm. And so this sort of publicness, I thought that would be a nice way to end today, if that's okay.
Sure. And you know, sort of as I suggested before, talking about inaugural addresses, it's hard to make big, broad generalizations because specific moments need specific things. That said, I think it's important for this to be a public thing because we granted that power. The person who's swearing on a Bible or whatever it is they choose to swear on to take office, they were given that office by us. And I think not just during inaugurations, I think in all kinds of ways. I think regular press briefings. I think early on in the last administration, the president used to step onto Air Force One and not turn around and wave to the cameras. And I remember going on Twitter and saying, yeah, see, the reason that's a problem is even though it's a stupid, trivial thing, it showed a president basically recognizing the fact that we're the ones who matter. So for that reason, I think it's important for it to be in front of us, performed for us, in addition to all the ceremonial aspects of it, because we grant power. That is, we grant it and we can take it away, and that is the fundamental core of democracy. And doing that ceremony in public is a reminder of that in a kind of gut way that I think we don't even have to think about, and we understand. So that is my assumption about that. We are out of time, but before we zip off, and for those of you who are new here, let me say, because I saw 1 or 2 people asking about this, the after party. Those of you who are watching on Facebook cannot join the after party because we stopped filming. However, if you want to join the after party, you can connect through the NCHE link. The after party is not open. Someone said on Twitter today, only members can be in the after party. Oh no. Anyone who's here can be in the after party. And all that means is We stopped filming, which is why you can't see us on Facebook anymore, but we just stay here. And so if you stick around, we stop recording. And what that means is we can speak a little more freely and really have a community bonding kind of a conversation. So if you are here and want to stick around, the after party will now start. If you are on Facebook and want to join it, just find the link, ncheteach.org/conversations, and you can join the after party too. And it goes on for a little while, and we talk about whatever comes up. And I think we're going to have a lot to talk about today. So
I can't possibly think what we're going to talk about today.
I have no idea. But
nothing else is all going on.
I want to, as always, thank you all for coming. But I also want to thank this community and NCHE and Matt for everyone coming together here in this way and enabling this to happen every Thursday, because I've been trying really hard to give something, but the fact of the matter is I've been getting a lot from this too. This community has really mattered at a time of a lot of difficulties because, as I've said in a lot of other weeks, this is a community, and that matters in so many ways right now. And we're a community that talks about things that matter, and we don't scream at each other. And so I just wanted to thank you all because yesterday, probably after my second martini, I began some thank yous, and this is a thank you that I wanted to give, that this community has really become a special thing and matters to me. So I will stop there, and I guess now we will segue to the after party. Stick around if you would like to be part of it. And if not, we will see you in a week.
Thanks, everybody.